Thank you for having the patience to wait through a Pesach break. And now we are on the far side of the Red Sea. And made it through all the locks on the canal and what have you. And we get to start. Today is the 11th day of the Omer, and which means we're working way up to Shavuot, and also that means that it is Yom HaShoah Gvura. So today is Yom HaShoah. There are any number of worthwhile programs that will stream that one can tune into over the course of the day on Yom HaShoah, but that won't be our theme today, but it's worth noting. That also means that, so you're aware of it, if you wouldn't be otherwise, Rosh Chodesh is Monday, and Yom HaZikaron will be observed on Tuesday night and Wednesday, and Yom Ha'atzmaut on Wednesday night and Thursday next week. It is a busy time in the calendar. So with that, that's all background. I'm here just to do Tanakh. Make sense? We're good. Oh, and Laura, I heard, I was told that you spoke very beautifully yesterday. So thank you. We're going to dive into the book of Daniel. So, which means, since it's Torah, we have to, we get to say a bracha before, and there's a bracha for water, shahakol, and there's a bracha for a Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitzenu v'tzivanu v'tzivanu asok b'divrei Torah. And all right, what are we doing? We get to look at chapter 4 of the book of Daniel. And look, like, to be honest with you, chapter it's not the most exciting chapter in the book. I got to be honest with you. On some level, it really is there, for me at least. It's sort of it redoes a lot of the things that were in chapter 2, but it sets up, it really sets up chapter 5. Chapter 5 is where things get exciting. Chapter 5 is where Daniel will read the writing on the wall, and where we'll get the phrase, the writing on the wall. But before we get, that's sort of the payoff of the book, is to like encounter the first writing on the wall. But before we get there, for the sake of completeness, at the very least, we're gonna go through chapter 4. But now I'll pause for a second. Are there questions people want to ask before we start?
I have a comment, Rabbi.
Sir.
On April 5th in the New York Times, an article appeared, "White Evangelical Resistance is the Obstacle in Vaccination Effort." They say, "It would be God's will if I'm here or if I'm not here." And who do they quote? "Go ahead, throw us in the lion's den. Go ahead, throw us in the furnace. God's people miraculously will survive persecution after refusing to submit to temporal powers." They quote Daniel as the reason they don't want to get vaccinated.
Well, I would say that if there's one thing that you should get from our study of Daniel here, is that you should not get vaccinated. I'm just joking. This
is being recorded.
Oh yeah, it's on YouTube even.
Now you tell me.
Right, exactly. Stom. Just a little gallows humor. Taking Karen later today to get her second shot. Right. So this is part of it. So this is every. Thank you, Richard, for bringing that in. Like, I skipped those articles somewhat on purpose. Like every text, every statement, all words can be used in different ways. It's sort of some more easily and some in a more difficult way. statements like the one quoted, which is from earlier in the book of Daniel, chapter 2, like that sort of being thrown in the furnace and will survive, it's set up, is useful for times of legitimate civil disobedience and harmful in times of illegitimate calls for civil disobedience. So, like, obviously, it's possible that the reason that text makes it into the Tanakh, when you quote, is to help the Jews get through periods like, or very specifically, the Syrian oppressions, the story of Hanukkah, right? That when the powerful, all-encompassing empire seeks to force you to be something else, you have to resist and you have to last through it. Like, that is possibly what the message of that is. And it's a good message when Antiochus comes, or when the Romans come, or when the Crusaders come, or when the church comes, or when the Sultan comes and tries to force you to convert, or whatever the case may be, much less the Nazis, the Soviets. You have to resist, and you have to have faith that you have to live with hope that you're going to get through this, and that you're supposed to remain loyal to God and not sell your soul and not sell out. And the risk in saying that you should disobey is that you're going to misappropriate that idea to a situation where you're not supposed to disobey. Obviously, as you know, like, the overwhelming scientific consensus is that vaccines are okay. It's not something to resist. It's not government mind control. Just isn't. And that's just it. People who use the Bible to justify slavery, people who use the Bible to justify not getting vaccinated, people who use the Bible to justify bigotry, people who use it for anything, and they'll use it for the opposite. People who use the Bible to bring down slavery, people who will use the Bible to encourage and embracing of those who are different from ourselves. People who use it as a spur to greater human flourishing. It'll be used for both. That, by the way, is part of the process of interpretation, and part of why you're supposed to actually, like, engage. Why we engage deeply with the text is to try and challenge our otherwise existing views, in part. But good catch. After reading that article, Richard, did you regret getting vaccinated?
I was ready to get vaccinated again.
Yeah, so that's just it. Like, people will misuse it.
These were some leaders of the evangelical church.
And it'll come, right. So it'll come, yeah, it's, alas, it's a misreading and probably a transference, right? It's sort of understandable to be angry at any number of structures of society or structures of the state, or feel like they're ignoring you, or feel like they're not acting as they should, or not in a godly way. That's a legitimate complaint. Like, God knows there are problems in our country and problems in our society that require addressing. And pinning it on this vaccination, or that's what you're supposed to resist, is tragic. We all need filters. It's not just simply applying. So obviously it's our Bible too. Traditional Judaism will, of course, have the view that that even though the Tanakh says, the Torah says, "Ani Hashem Rofecha," I am Adonai, your healer. That doesn't mean that you lie back and let God heal you. We have a long love affair with all things medical and with doctors and things like this. And that's because we there's an assumption that we're supposed to use the tools that God gave us, not sit back and assume that everything works out fine if I just keep doing what I'm doing. That said, Daniel's worldview, which will be evident, this is our transfer into this, is that there's a great plan for the world that we sit back and interpret. Judaism doesn't say one thing all the time, right? It is rarely Judaism says X. I mean, sometimes that is true. There's one God. Don't eat bacon. And for a lot of theological things, Daniel's worldview, the book of Daniel's worldview, is that there's a great plan. We don't understand it, but God will sometimes grant seers or prophets, people like Daniel, the ability to tell us some of it. And alongside that, there are other points in the tradition where there's a sense of like, there isn't some like unalterable plan, but like the world will be influenced by our decisions. We're not just rats running through a maze. We have agency, and what humans do will affect what history becomes. So one can pick one's own perspective. The people cited in the article more likely subscribe to the former view, sort of like we're rats running through a maze. There's a great plan. All we have to do is like keep moving. Chapter 4. I, Nebuchadnezzar. So now, Nebuchadnezzar is the king of this that we've seen throughout. Most scholars assume that this is not Nebuchadnezzar speaking, meaning that the events described would map onto, if I'm not mistaken, his son's rule and not his. There are a few points over the course of the book that indicate its later origins, meaning that the author is not writing in the early period of the exile and describing historical events that he saw, but it's much later. He's making because the author makes mistakes that nobody living through the time would make. Only somebody living long after the time would make, right? Like there are certain like sort of images of history that like become stuck in people's minds, whether or not it actually happened. And somebody living through the time would be unlikely to make the same mistakes, right? Today people might say, you can find people saying that, oh, well, the Civil War is about states' rights, it's not about slavery. Well, if you look at the documents from the period, people living through it seem to think it was about slavery. Nobody at the time would have made that mistake, but after the fact, people are likely to make those mistakes. So there are tons of things like that. And sometimes I feel appropriated for the day. Like sometimes because World War II and the Shoah are taught back to back in schools, I think some people walk away with the idea that the United States was involved in World War II. Since the Allies were the agents that ended the Shoah, as it were, that they went into the war for that purpose. And of course, that's not the case, but it sort of gets conflated in people's minds. Oh, we did this to accomplish that, when of course that was in no way a war aim or a primary war, right? But it gets confused in people's minds. That seems to happen a lot here, where nobody actually living in Babylonia at this time would make the kind of historical errors that the author makes. So this is an indication that it is a later book being projected back. Doesn't mean that it's false. It's just not. It's just it's a different sort of literature meant to teach something, not meant to be literal history in the way that we understand it. We got 2 words in. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was tranquil in my house and flourishing in my palace. This is Daniel chapter 4. I saw a dream and it frightened me, and thoughts upon my couch and visions in my head panicked me. By me as an edict been issued for all the sages of Babylonia to come before me, that they may make known the meaning of the dream. This is a reminiscent, of course, of chapter 2, where a very similar thing happens, and of the Joseph story, where a version of this happens. Then did the soothsayers, wizards, Chaldeans, and diviners come, and I said the dream to them, but its meaning they did not make known to me. Right? Those sort of listy things remain common, like where he, like same in chapter 2, like went through big lists of things, and similarly, all of the people who are supposed to know these things are called upon, and they don't know the meaning of the dream. And latterly, Daniel came before me, whose name is Belshazzar. Right? Again, he has his Jewish name, and his man his assimilated name, Balthazar, or the name that the largest society gives him, like the name of my God. Right? So this false etymology, again, maybe a mistake that somebody living in the time would make. Bel is one of the Babylonian gods. The author assumes that Balthazar is pulling on the name of Bel, the Babylonian god, but it really means something else. The Jewish Study Bible notes it's not for Bel, the Babylonian god. It actually means protect his life, or perhaps protect the prince's life. It is not based on the god Bel. So again, sort of like a little, but the point of the story is the king gave Daniel a Babylonian name, and he used it. Whose name is Balthazar, like the name of my God, in whom the spirit of the holy gods resides. Right? He's a good polytheist. That's that's sort of part of the story. Despite the fact that in earlier chapters he seemed to have these conversion moments, he always slides back. Of whom I know the spirit of the holy gods resides, and in you, and no mystery is withheld from you. These are the visions of my dream I saw, and say its meaning. Verse 7. And the visions in my head upon the couch I saw, and look, there was a tree in the earth, and its height was great. So now the in JPS, this is set aside. This begins something that's set aside as poetry. Robert Alter doesn't do it that way if you're looking at his translation, but I think it probably should be set apart as poetry, meaning with just a few words per line to give this sense that this is something that is poetic. So with midway through verse 7, he begins describing his dream. What's his dream? Look, there's a tree in the earth, and its height was great. The tree grew and became mighty, and its top reached the heavens, and its branches the end of all the earth. Its foliage was lovely, and its fruit great, and there was food for all. There was food for all in it. Beneath, the beasts of the field were shaded, and in its branches the birds of the heavens dwelled, and all flesh was nourished from it. Right, this, by the way, if we Babylonian culture clearly had legends of sort of miraculous life-giving trees. That's reflected here in a very late biblical text. And of course, you're familiar with similar ideas that may also, or likely also, originated in Babylon from the earliest biblical texts, right? Like this idea of a primordial mighty tree. Verse 10. I saw among the visions in my head, and look, a holy emissary. Alter translates emissary. I think JPS translates watcher. Either one works. JPS's comment is watcher, an angelic figure, common in Jewish apocalyptic literature, who executes God's justice. And some texts, watchers are fallen angels. This is another sign of a very late biblical text where things, like in the earliest texts, things get weird. In later texts, things get weird. When you have references to sort of like the backstory of angels, you know you're getting into later odd stories. Alter's comment there holy emissary. Many modern interpretations regard the noun here, ir, as watcher, deriving from air, away. The grounds for this understanding are not conclusive. It is at least as likely that ir is an Aramaic cognate of tzir, emissary. So what it means isn't clear, but some sort of divine being is what's being called upon here, verse 10. So in JPS's translation is, in the vision of my mind in bed, I looked and saw a holy watcher coming down from heaven, or a holy emissary coming down from heaven. In some level, his dream is sort of like, in addition to this sort of like life-giving tree, there's a divine messenger coming down. This is a key part of this vision. Holy emissary come down from the heavens, calling out loudly, and thus say, cut down the tree, hack off its branches, shake loose its foliage, and scatter its fruit, that the beasts go off from underneath it, and the birds from its branches, that leave one of its roots in the ground, and with a chain of iron and bronze, be it set in the grass of the field, and by the dew of the heavens, be it moistened, and with the beasts its portion, and the grass of the earth, its heart shall be changed from humankind, and the beast's heart shall be given to it. And 7 seasons shall pass over. By the decree of the divine emissaries is the word, and the utterance of the holy ones is the pronouncement, so that the living may know that the Most High rules over the kingdom of man. To whom he wills, he gives it. In the lowliest of men, he shall raise up over it. This is the vision, right? Like and you already feel this stuff feels very different from most biblical literature that came before. So what does this mean? Well, that's what Daniel's going to have to figure out. One thing that among things worth noting here is its heart shall be changed from humankind. Heart, frequently in biblical literature, is a metaphor for the seat of understanding. We, West, use the heart as a symbol for the seat of emotion. And we use the mind or the brain or the head as the seat of reason. If you say you have a gut feeling, that means one thing. If you feel in your heart, that means something else. If you know it in your head, it means something else. Feel in your kishkas, it means something else. So again, heart most likely doesn't mean seat of like changing. What we mean when we say change in heart means something change in head. Same thing, of course, is likely the case with Pharaoh. When his heart is hardened, it's not an emotional thing; it's an intellectual thing. His intellect becomes strengthened or fixated. It's not emotion. It's intellect becoming strong. Yes. So clearly, so this life-giving tree, the emissary says, cut it down, its heart shall be changed. And 7 seasons pass over it. 7 years, 7 seasons, 7 periods of time, something like this. By the decree of the divine emissaries is the word, and the utterance of the holy ones is the pronouncement, so the living may know that the Most High rules over the kingdom of man, to whom he gives it, and the lowliest of men, he shall rise up over it. This to the earlier point of the news article, again, check Robert Alter's comment on verse 14. This is the great recurring theme of Daniel, an idea nurtured when the Jews were under the dominion of overpowering empires, Babylonian, Persian, Greek, of course, later Roman, all others. Human dominion is transient and contingent, a mere mirage in comparison with the dominion of God, right? If evil people are ruling over you, know that they are not eternal. powerful though they may be, no human empire is eternal. The people living in those empires, please take note, never see it coming. They assume this one is different. This empire will last forever. We're the ones who will break that trend, but always the empires come crashing down. So where God and devotion to God remains. So this is if you're the emissary saying like, know that empires rise, fall, people should know that God's going to carry through. End of quote. This is verse 15. This is a dream that I, King Nebuchadnezzar, saw, and you, Balthazar, say its meaning. For all the sages of my kingdom have not been able to make its meaning known to me, but you can, for the spirit of the holy gods resides within you. Right? Those lines are fun because, again, like he's sort of the Daniel, who we know to be the very image of pious monotheist here, is said to be to have all of the gods working through him. New paragraph, verse 16. Then Daniel, whose name was Balthazar, reminded, was astounded for an hour, right? Unlike before in chapter 2, he's like, oh, this is what it means. Here, there's a lot going on. He needs like time to like collect himself and to figure out and be given the vision or to figure out whatever it is to figure out what's going on. And his thoughts panicked him. The king spoke out and said, Balthazar, let not the dream and its meaning panic you. So he's disquieted by the situation. Balthazar answered, now we're given his, the narrator is referring to him by his Babylonian name, answered and said, my lord, may the dream be for your enemies and its meaning for your foes. This is parallel, of course, to Joseph, when Joseph has a bad interpretation to give, like it's not a dream I would like to get, right? This, like, so it's a sign that it's a bad one. I have to tell you what it means, but I wish I didn't have to tell you what it means. I wish what I was about to tell you was for your enemies and not for you. So Daniel is loyal, but has a bad message to give. 17. The tree that you saw, it was great and mighty, and its height reached the heavens, and its branches in all the earth. This is part of the repetition that this author loves, where things are quoted verbatim. And its foliage was lovely, and its fruit great, and its food for all in it. Beneath it dwelled the beasts of the fields, and its branches rested the birds of the heavens. This is usually in the Tanakh they'll say, and so forth, but Daniel doesn't. You are the king who has become great and mighty, and your greatness has grown and reached to the heavens, and its branches to all the earth. So what is the tree that reaches the heavens and like gives life to all? That is you, O king. Right? Verse 20. And as to your seeing, O king, a holy emissary coming down from the heavens and saying, cut down the tree and destroy it, to leave one of its roots in the ground, and with a chain of iron and bronze, set it in the grass of the field, and by the dew of the heavens, let it be moistened, and the beasts of the field its portion, until 7 seasons pass over it. Again, quoting directly from earlier. 21, this is its meaning, O king, in the decree of the Most High, that is to come upon my lord the king. Right? Nebuchadnezzar will cite mighty gods. Daniel will sort of like subtly correct. Only one. 22. And you shall they banish from men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and grass like the ox shall they feed you, and from the dew of the heavens shall they give you drink. Meaning that instead of living as a king, you will be living as a beast. And 7 seasons shall pass over you until you know that the Most High rules over the kingdom of man, and whom he chooses to give it. And as to their saying, to leave one of the roots of the tree, your kingdom shall endure for you once you know that the heavens rule. And yet, O king, let my counsel be pleasing to you, and redeem your offenses through righteousness, and showing kindness to the poor, let your tranquility be prolonged. All this is to come upon King Nebuchadnezzar. So this is the prophecy. You're getting cut down. You're going to live these 7 seasons. This is you're gonna live these 7 seasons in like as a beast in great poverty, and not knowing what's going on. But in the end, your kingdom will be redeemed, right? This. So no one else can interpret it. Daniel interprets it. This is not unusual. It's not anything that we wouldn't expect. This is similar to what came before. Notice that here, though, like there's a little bit of an out there, like, oh, you should through righteousness, you should you can like reduce your sentence, but there's no way out of it. Like notice that this is like when I said earlier, sort of like that there's one specific way of seeing things. Like there's a divine plan. The divine plan is to take you out, and there's really nothing you can do about it. Like this is one vision of how God rules the world, and it's a vision that everything happens for a reason, and it's part of the big plan. And it's just up to Daniel to tell you what the plan is. And you can like he can sort of like change things a little bit, but not a lot. Verse 26. At the end of the 12 months, he was walking up on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon. And the king spoke out and said, "Is this not the great Babylon that I have built as the house of the kingdom, as the might of my power, and for the honor of my glory?" Right. So this is like we give the prophecy. This seems to be then a year later, and I'm gonna make sure I'm in the right spot. This is like it's a year later, and we're going to see what happens. By the way, one significant thing is are the markings that, of course, wouldn't appear in the Hebrew. JPS ends the quote of what Daniel is saying at the end of verse 24. Tranquility be prolonged. Period. End of quote. Robert Alter extended a sentence. All this to come upon King Nebuchadnezzar. So the way JPS reads it is that the narrator begins by saying, all this essentially is going to come upon King Nebuchadnezzar. It's the narrator saying it, and then goes on to say, like sort of in connection with that, here's how it's going to happen to him. At the end of 12 months, he was walking up on the roof of the royal palace, the king in Babylon. The king spoke out and said, "Is this not my great Babylon that I've built as the house of the kingdom, which is the might of my power and the honor of my glory?" Right? And you don't have to read too much of the Tanakh to know that when somebody says, "Oh, look at this wonderful thing I have built," that they're about to find out where they stand in the pecking order, as it were. Like in Deuteronomy, it's a literal thing, right? Deuteronomy says that you can't go out and say, "By my own hand I have built this, and my good fortune came through my hard work, and because I did it." Deuteronomy says, you do that, God's going to show you that it wasn't you, it was God. So whenever somebody does this, says, "Look what I did, I'm the one who did it," it's not going to turn out well for them. Verse 28, the word was still in the mouth of the king when a voice fell from the heavens. "To you they say, King Nebuchadnezzar, the kingship has turned away from you." Sort of familiar to what Samuel said to Saul. "And from man, they all banish you, and with the beasts of the field, your dwelling. Grass like the ox, they shall feed you, and 7 seasons shall pass over you, until you know that the Most High rules over the kingdom of man, and to whom he chooses to give it." So again, like just like the word for word, what the emissary said the message from heaven would be is in fact the message from heaven. And the message is human kings serve at the pleasure of God, and God will seat and unseat them as fit. And you are about to go from your royal station to eating grass. Alter's comment underlines this part for verse 30. The writer hews to his commitment to repeat verbatim what has been said before, said twice before. His is a world of oracular predictions and perfect fulfillments, and the exact repetition expresses the absolute correspondence between the two. In Daniel's world, there's really no wiggle room for human freedom. Everything plays out according to God's predestined plan that is an essential aspect of the apocalyptic worldview. The only textual detail here that goes beyond repetition is the wild growth of the king's hair and nails, which simply elaborates the idea that there is no distance between him and the beasts. So the again, like sort of like what I said, like relating to the news article, there are different ways of seeing the world. We're used to, hopefully, a Jewish worldview that's something that we hit partly on like Yom Kippur of like, repent, change the way, change your inscription. The world will change based on your behavior. You can change everything. And Daniel's not that. It's like, you know what? There's a great plan, and and someday the great plan is going to happen to you. Good, bad, the great plan's coming to you, and your role in it is to be a pawn in the divine plan that God has designed.
So, Rabbi, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So we don't get any indication that the king did take Daniel's advice and decide to be more beneficent and kinder to the poor, and thereby reduce his sentence, as it were. I mean, I'm not seeing where we got any indication that his time period of being demoted to the state of a beast was reduced by his good behavior.
Right. I may even have overstated it earlier by saying that he could be reduced like out of like this sort of like rushing to say that it could be something like time off. If he translate, redeem your offenses through righteousness and showing kindness to the poor, let your tranquility be prolonged. If we're going to drill down on that, before I get to your statement, but it's triggering this for me that it's going to happen anyway. You can increase the time before the sentence is carried out, but it's going to happen. Someone's not reducing, it's almost just like putting it off. You're right that we don't get that sense, or we're not given that sense, or we haven't yet been given that sense. But so you're right in that they doesn't do it. But there's not a sense that he can avoid it, but he can, like that line from Daniel, like I feel like could be read as he could delay it. Same thing.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
There's a note in the Jewish Study Bible.
Yeah, I'm just looking at that now. Go for it.
Daniel urges the king to reform his practices, but in light of Nebuchadnezzar's conquest of Judah and the destruction of the temple, his repentance could not have been seriously maintained.
Right. Right. And it seems like it's and sort of as any, like even I, like in read it the first time, I was tricked, as it were, into like into a reflexive stance of do right and your sentence will be reduced. But really, again, it's your JPS that your serenity may be extended. It's sort of like you will slightly delay the inevitable. Right.
But
So
it seems like part of the lesson that could have been imparted by this book is lost by, we see the power of God over what man thinks is his own power. So we get that part, but the other part of the lesson could have been, try to do good deeds, and maybe your punishment will not be so severe, even if it's a matter of your serenity being extended. There's nothing. It seems like that could have been a lesson imparted that was just kind of left hanging there.
Yes, and it's not like, and this is coming to me as you're questioning, look at how different this is from Jonah. In Jonah, the sinners in Nineveh, which is in Babylon, or the repent, change their ways, and their punishment is eliminated. They're let off, and that's sort of course, like what upsets Jonah, right? Is that like, I knew you were a forgiving God. That's why I didn't want to do it. Like, they change, and they're given time served. You fasted, you change your ways, done. Here, Daniel is like, your serenity can be extended. It's like we'll leave you on house arrest for another couple of months before carrying out the terrible sentence that there's no way around. So it's there, but it's a different sort. But it is in fact a different. It feels like a different message than that of Jonah. Obviously, Jonah becomes because of its greater prominence, we read it every year, on the number one day, is designed to be the one that sticks in our heads. But this is an influential way of thinking too, as the article indicates, which is so the message on some level gets lost, that no matter what, like in that, it's sort of, to Sandy, to your point, like that, for even if this were your theology, doing something good can increase the good that you experience, even if it's bad in the end. So like getting the shot is a good thing to do, even if, you're still supposed to resist the tyranny of the government or whatever it might be. There's some wiggle room, but not a lot. Not as much as in Jonah, where there's tons of wiggle room. Fascinating.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
There's a big correlation between the 7 seasons and the 7 years in Joseph. Because there's 7 years of famine and 7 years of feasting and stuff like that. So there's a big correlation between that.
Yes, definitely. I think you're right. The dream interpreting, the king, the foreign servant being the interpreter, everyone else being stumped, the 7 seasons. Absolutely. And again, the key Daniel difference of almost this determinism of it is that Joseph, when he interprets the foreign king's dream after no one else can do it, and includes the 7 seasons and things like this, or 7 years, what they proposes a solution. What this man could be, I just don't know, right? Proposes a solution. Here, it's like you're in, like in the Torah, it's going to happen, but there are ways you can deal with it. Here, it's going to happen, and it's going to happen sooner or later. And Jonah, you can avoid what's going to happen entirely. So you see like different ways of conceiving of the world, and it really is 3 different sort of types of theology, and they're all present, in the Tanakh, and they're all similar, but they are in fact different. And you see how you'd respond differently to the world. If I'm Jonah, or if I'm in Jonah's world, and God's decrees can be changed by my behavior, then I have agency, and my behavior is super important. If I'm just here to carry out the plan that's existing, and all I have to do is stay the course. It's different for the news article. But what I want to do by highlighting these factors is to show that, again, they're not. It is a legitimate biblical read that the anti-vax crowd has. It's useless to deny that to deny it. It's a legitimate read. It's just not the only one. There are equally legitimate reads of the Bible or of the Jewish tradition or the Judeo-Christian tradition or whatever it is that contradict it. Verse 30, at that very moment, and also this should be a new paragraph. At that very moment, the word was fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar, and from man he was banished, and he ate grass like the ox, and from the dew of the heavens his body was moistened until his hair grew like the eagles and his nails like birds. This is a sense of he's sort of gone crazy and is acting like the animals. There is I don't know if it's not coming to me. I feel like there's another biblical parallel for man becoming crazy and sort of like becoming animal-like. I don't know why it's escaping me. But that's sort of the image here, right? Like this is the mad king. He's the throne is stripped from him, and he's no longer like among the rational. And at the end of many days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes to the heavens, and my mind returned to me. Right? It was irrational, and now I'm rational again. Their mind being mind. I blessed the Most High and praised and extolled the Eternal One, whose dominion is an eternal dominion and his kingdom for all generations. Right? Like that. So again, recognize that like reason came back to him, dropped the other gods. He's on to the Most High now, and is quoting Ashrei. Right, Baruch Hashem, he's quoting Ashrei. That Malchut Kolamim V'Shaltecha B'Chol Dor V'Dor is what he's in Aramaic is what he's saying. The mem verse of Psalm 145. His dominion is eternal dominion, his kingdom for all generations. It's Ashrei, and all the earth dwellers are counted as naught. And he chooses, and as he chooses, he does, with the array of the heavens and the earth's dwellers. And there is none who can protest against him and say to him, "What have you done?" At that very moment, my mind returned to me, and the glory of my kingdom, my grandeur and my splendor returned to me, and me did my counselors and my nobles seek out, and I was set up over my kingdom, and exceeding greatness was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt the glory of the King of the heavens, of all of whose acts are truth, and whose paths are justice, who can bring low those who go about in pride. A very, very, very pious speech. So again, end of many days, that would be the end of the 7 seasons or 7 years or whatever it might be, right? He goes through this, Alter notes, this purgatory type experience, recognizes that he's subservient to God, that it's not like this is my kingdom that I built, so this is God's kingdom, and I've been appointed, temporary custodian over it, but I am the there's one landlord, and if you're king, you're the superintendent of the landlord's property, and know that you're the superintendent of it. You are not the owner. You are the one overseeing according to what the boss wants. The Alter's last note there for verse 34. It says, this whole concluding speech is often characterized as a doxology. Doxology is like a list of praises where there's not a lot of like sort of subtlety or things. It's just like a list of praises. Kaddish famously is a doxology. It's just like a list of great things about God. And there's no sort of like angle to it, praised and glorified as should God's name be, and like it just goes through like a bunch of superlatives That's doxology. It's just a list of superlatives. This speech is something of a list of superlatives. So the story, like others in Daniel, turns on creating circumstances that drive the characters to a formal affirmation of a theological principle. God is great. God's plans are altogether just. I'm pulling on Lincoln. Or Lincoln's pulling on this. There's very little that resembles this in the earlier biblical narrative, altar notes, where complexities and ambiguities of character preclude this sort of flat confession of faith, right? Even like if you think of like Jacob, after going through everything Jacob goes through, says things like, if God is with me as I return to Israel, then God will be my God. Even after like all the stuff Jacob goes through, he's still Jacob. His character is so well developed. He's still like cutting deals because he's the kind of guy who's always cutting deals. Joseph does the same thing. Joseph, even after everything he goes through, is still sort of like is lording things over his brothers till the very end. Still is always sort of like, yeah, but we all know I'm the one in charge. Moses, after everything Moses goes through, still is like has his stubborn, angry streak. David never stops being David. Even on his deathbed, he's still like, hey, Solomon, take care of my enemies. You know what to do with the guys who cross you, right? Like there's always other biblical stories have really well-developed characters. Here, these guys, like Alter's read of it, is sort of like that these guys are a little more wooden, a little more cardboard, a little more like bad movies where there are stock characters, and they just sort of like play on a type. Here, there's less feeling in it. I was great, I suffered, now I recognize God is great. So they're B movie characters rather than like the deep, well-developed characters that we see in Samuel, to a certain extent in Kings, and certainly throughout the Torah. These are more stand-ins.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
What I found fascinating, and sort of what you were saying also, is that this really did not happen to Nebuchadnezzar. It happened centuries later to someone that they say is Nabonidus.
Yeah.
And
right.
that he actually went mad.
Right. That there actually was a king who went mad and essentially had to go on leave, right? Like sort of had to go, was sort of in exile or had to take the cure or, like go on vacation for a few years, like to get his mind back. And I feel like I'm sure there are like more modern parallels to this, like where the madness of king, like where the ruler has a mental break. I think Alder might even use the word mental break, or it might be in JPS, or it might be in reading James Kugler, like, had a mental break, and you can come back from it, but you sort of like need a few years, like to come back. So yes, actually happened, but not to Nebuchadnezzar. So the assumption is that the author puts Nebuchadnezzar in order to fit it in with the rest of Daniel. But like the story is like from a later time, and that's part of somebody actually living at this time wouldn't have made that mistake. But like later on, like a few hundred years after the fact, like who can remember whether this was, Louis the 12th or Louis the 13th? I can keep my 15th and 16th straight, but like, some of the others sort of like get mixed up. Nobody living in the time gets them mixed up, but like a few hundred years later, we can mix up, Henry the 6th and 7th.
So maybe that's also why Nebuchadnezzar doesn't feel fleshed out.
Right, because it's not a thing. It's right. It's almost like playing on. Maybe everyone knew that there was a king who had a mental break. Maybe everyone forgot who it was because you forgot who it was. But Nebuchadnezzar, everyone still remembers. Like so, like it's sort of like you put it onto that character, which occasionally happens where like this happens often in quotes, right? Like we'll attribute any great quote to Benjamin Franklin or something like that, or Winston Churchill, when really it wasn't him. But we want to put in his mouth. So like the stories get attached to Nebuchadnezzar, even if it wasn't him. So yeah, there was a king who this happened to, wasn't him.
Rabbi, what I find a little bit interesting is the first dream, Daniel not only told him what the dream meant, he was able to tell him what the dream was. So he could do something that none of the king's other minions could do. Yet when this dream comes, why didn't he go to Daniel first? He went to all the other ones who couldn't help him. Then he goes to Daniel.
Right, exactly. And the end of those earlier stories, like where the king's like, oh, now I recognize God as the only God. Like it's always like back to, it's like a sitcom where they like sort of like it goes back to the beginning, and like at the end of it, like you just forget what happened. Yeah. So yes, he should have gone to Daniel first. He should have already recognized God, but he doesn't. Another sign that these might be disparate stories that were later like stitched into one narrative. So that ends like a certain a certain part of the book. So JPS's note for the beginning of chapter 4 was that Phyllis sort of cited is that the king's temporary absence here likely suggests that this model for the story is not Nebuchadnezzar, but Nabonius, the last Babylonian king, 556 to 539 BC. He spent 10 years at Tema in the Arabian Peninsula, allowing his son Balthazar to reign as viceroy in his stead. Nabonius is first person. Chapter 5 will be a story of Nabonius's son, Belshazzar, almost but not the same as Daniel's Babylonian name. He's the son of Nabonius, who's the likely actual subject of the chapter we just read. And JPS will note he himself was never king, but rather viceroy, while his father was, mad. One last thing, the JPS notes that the prayer of Nabonius is a fragment found in the Dead Sea Scrolls in Qumran, and is a first-person account of Nabonius being cured by an unnamed Jewish seer after an affliction of 7 years, meaning that this legend of the king of the mighty empire who goes mad and then is cured after 7 years may have been sort of like a legend that like floated around in different forms, and just sort of like we like telling stories about our great figures, and you can have the crown and what have you. The same took place in these sort of like late biblical times, maybe with these significant events that sort of reshaped for pious purposes. Chapter 5 will continue to a sense that scene, and chapter 5 will have both the writing on the wall and the lion's den. So next week for just this.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.